Good afternoon everyone, thanks for joining me on the third episode of my video blog. I've actually been flying this time, so I'm super excited to tell you a bit more about that. But what I thought I'd do is just talk you through the last couple of weeks because a few things have happened. Firstly, I had a lesson planned that was cancelled due to the weather and I was absolutely gutted. There was a lot of flying going on at the aerodrome because there was quite a few IFR pilots there, but my instructor quite rightly said that we shouldn't go up because there were pockets of rain around and it really wasn't much fun to fly. Instead though, we were able to use the time to complete a load of stuff that I needed to learn just with the aircraft on the ground, which was fantastic. So we did what they call the A check, which is the first check that the aircraft has on a flying day, just so it's a walk around checking oil, fuel, all of that kind of stuff. So I've fully learnt that, which was good. I also managed to buy the checklist for the PA28, so this is the one the flying school provides, and I actually got to use this in the flight that we had this week, which is fantastic. So even though this lesson was cancelled, it was still pretty good. They took their first chunk of money from me because if you spend in £1,000 chunks at Booker, they give you a 3% discount. So I paid that onto the account. I also had to buy membership for the flying club, so that was about just over £100 for the rest of the year, and I think this was about £11, so not too expensive. The rest of the money just sits there on the account, and we kind of call it off as I do each flight. So that was cool. Then the following weekend I had a lesson. The weather was beautiful. I'd been watching it every day all week, so obviously I was so disappointed the week before. But this time the instructor was sick, so the night before the flying school called me and just reminded me that we weren't able to go. So that was really sad times, but again, completely the right decision. If you're not feeling very well, the worst place you could possibly be is in control of an aeroplane. I'm pretty sure that's covered in the human factor stuff that I'll have to study as part of my exams too. So I can't help but be honest and say it was really disappointing though. I was in a bit of a mood about it, but as I say, the complete right thing to do. On Tuesday this week though, I actually had a half day at work and I booked a lesson in the hope that I'd be able to get there and have the lesson, and the weather was good, the instructor was there, he wasn't sick, so we were good to go. And the flight was just incredible. I had so much fun. We covered a briefing at the start, so to walk through what we were going to do in terms of exercises in the aircraft, and then waited for the aircraft to become available, and then as soon as we were up there, the stuff we covered this time was taxiing. So of course from the minute the aircraft was started, I had a bit of hands-on, or feet on as it were in this case, to taxi the aircraft to the active runway. And then in the air we did the effects of the further flying controls. So we were looking at the throttle, so what happens to the pitch of the aircraft and the yaw of the aircraft when you apply or reduce the throttle. We learn how to set the mixture of the aircraft so that if we're in the cruise we can use the engine more efficiently. We talked about ice build-up in the engine and the use of the carburetor heat to prevent that ice build-up. And one of the most interesting bits for me was the effect of speeds, the speed of the airflow over the wings on the effectiveness of the flying controls. So the faster you go, it's a bit like driving a car. When you're driving a car, the inputs on the steering wheel become less and less. It's exactly the same in an aircraft. But it doesn't take much more speed to make it much more sensitive, so I was really surprised at that. And also we learned about the effect of the slipstream from the engine on the controls at the rear of the aircraft, so the elevators to control the pitch and the rudders to control the yaw. With more engine power they become much more sensitive, and that was really interesting to see. The practical lesson demonstrated that really well. The other things that I learned, not necessarily surprised about, but it was just I guess a bit daunting, was the idea that you have to keep your eyes out of the window the whole time you're up there. And I know it sounds really obvious, but there was a lot going on at Wickham that day. We had helicopters around, there was a fairly busy day at the gliding school, and also the Cessnas and the Pipers out from the flying club too. So there was a fair bit of traffic. I'm sure they would say it's not their busiest day, but for me as someone new, there was quite a lot to see. And quite a few times whilst we were flying around, the instructor was pointing out traffic and it took me a little while to see it, just because I'm not used to looking for aircraft, and sometimes when they're below your level they're kind of masked in and around the villages that you see, so it's actually quite hard to pick them out. The instructor said that that's pretty normal, so nothing to worry about, and it'll be something that I get better at as my experience builds. So that was really interesting. The other thing that I learned was in the checklist there's a load of memory items that I need to learn. So anything in here, I don't know if you can see it very well, but where it's got a solid line next to them, those are items that I need to know from memory. So I think that's the next bit of study that I want to spend time on, just to make sure that for my next flights I'm clear on what I need to know and don't have to refer to this as much as I was in the last lesson. So how did it all feel? I can't tell you how frustrated I was on the 2 lessons that were cancelled, although I can sit here rationally and say that it was the safe thing to do, and of course it was. From a motivation level, it was really disappointing. So I think that's something that I'm going to have to learn to control in the future. Of course we want to have a really great time flying around, but only in a safe environment. So I think that's a small attitude adjustment required on my side. I'm also totally daunted by some of the topics, and I suppose that using the car analogy that I used earlier, it's the same thing. I remember when I first learnt to drive, I was spending a lot of time thinking about what my hands and feet were doing, and trying to throw it all together was daunting. It's the same with this. So hopefully over my next few lessons it'll become a little bit more run-of-the-mill, so that I can focus on the things that I'm learning rather than what my hands and feet are doing. But aside from all of that, I've had an amazing week. The fact that we got up flying on Tuesday was incredible. Throughout the whole flight I was really enjoying it, and when I got back on the ground it just made me realise that I'm definitely doing the right thing. I'm supposed to be up there learning to fly, and now I'm doing it, so it's incredible. So very, very happy with that. One of the other things that my instructor helped me with this week was a model that he showed me that we use to calculate roughly the crosswind component when we're approaching the runway to take off or to land. So hopefully it should be on the screen now, technology permitting, but basically it uses a clock face model. So you'll see the clock face in front of you, and basically what we do is we split this clock face into 4 quadrants, and then we remove the clock numbers around the outside and replace them with degrees. So here you'll see 0, 15, 30 and 45 degrees. So I've stuck an example up on the screen. This is the runway heading at Booker that we used on Tuesday. So runway 24, so 240 degrees. The wind was from 280 degrees at 10 knots, and we can use this clock face now to roughly calculate the crosswind component, so the strength of the winds, because we're not facing directly into it. So if the difference between the runway heading and the wind is between 0 and 15 degrees, you use 1/4 of the wind speed. If it's between 15 and 30 degrees, you use half of the wind speed. And if it's between 30 and 45 degrees, you use 3/4 of the wind speed. Anything else above that, you use the whole amount. So for our example here, there's 40 degrees difference between the runway heading and the wind direction. So we can therefore take 3/4 of the speed. So 3/4 of 10 knots is 7.5 knots. So we can use that to calculate the effects of the crosswind on the aircraft, on the takeoff roll. And from a student perspective, I think I'm limited to a 10-knot crosswind. So when I eventually get my hands on to do the takeoffs and landings, that'll be how I'll be able to quickly work out whether I'm within limits or not. Now obviously it's a rough thing, wind speeds aren't constant, and there's a fairly wide range for each of those quadrants, but it's a handy little model to use when you're busy on the taxi out to a runway or on the approach to the aerodrome. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Obviously, as I get more models like that, I'll continue to share them with you so that you can see the quick ways of learning. A couple of other things to tell you about. So I've booked my medical. I have to have a Class 2 medical for the PPL. That's happening on Tuesday next week. One thing that I didn't realise is that you need to have a very recent ophthalmology report, so an eye test, before you go for your Class 2 medical examination. So I've managed to book one in for Saturday. One thing to point out, in case you're experiencing this for the first time too, is that you have to have a CAA approved ophthalmology examination form, which you can get from their website, or in this case, the doctor who's doing my medical sent it to me. And that needs to be filled out in the days or very soon before your examination with the doctor. Another thing I learned about the medical is because I'm 33, I'm not old enough to be required to have the ECG. That kicks in at 40. So all I need to pay for this time is the £125 for the initial medical. So hopefully, all being well, fingers crossed, I should have that Class 2 medical very soon. And that'll be a bit of a relief because quite a few people have recommended that I get it done soon, just in case we find that I'm not worthy of a Class 2 medical certificate, so fingers crossed. A couple of other things that to tell you about. Firstly, in other news, I managed to get my solo tower ticket for Gatwick, so I can practice ahead of my exam. This is part of my virtual air traffic control hobby, which I use for flight simulation. It's called VATSIM. I'll put a little link up there so you can find out more if you're interested. And then also to let you know what I'll be covering in my next lesson. So hopefully that'll be on Saturday, weather permitting. It's quite thundery today, so we'll have to wait and see. But it will be straight, level and balanced flying. So that's roll, yaw and pitch to make sure that we're able to maintain a heading and altitude and we're not slipping around. Hopefully if we've got time we'll be able to cover part 1 and part 2. So part 1 is as I've just said, and part 2 is straight, level and balanced flight whilst changing the airspeed, so increasing the airspeed or decreasing, and then introducing flap to the wing. So it'll be interesting to see if we get enough time to do that. So for now, again, you should see on the screen my Instagram and Twitter feed. So again, feel free to drop me a message on there. I've started to follow quite a few people who I find interesting on Twitter, so I'm starting to retweet some of their stuff if you're interested on that. And I'm also starting to put more pictures up onto the Instagram feed, so have a little look. As always, if you wanted me to cover any other topics in this video blog, then drop me a message on one of those social media platforms and I'll do my best to do that. I will also try and remember this time to ask the instructor whether I'm allowed to do any filming. I've got a GoPro ready, so if I can attach that to the aircraft and do any filming of my lessons, I will do so, and then hopefully I can share that with you. So for now, that's it from me. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you all soon.